Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to thank His Excellency for his most gracious speech, being his last for this term of Parliament. Madam Speaker, allow me to thank the Attorney General for acknowledging that one of our former leaders, the late Sadiq Moidin Koya, who achieved a political compromise with the then Prime Minister Ratu Sekemisi Semara that resulted in the 1970 Constitution. Madam Speaker, that political compromise was the beginning of many compromises that resolved political conflicts in the national interest and resulted in monumental achievements through negotiated settlements. Indeed, the 1997 Constitution that he is now critical of and supported its abrogation was a product of such political compromise. If I remember correctly, Madam Speaker, the Honorable Attorney General was highlighting its salient provisions on Fiji Broadcasting Commission in a weekly program in the years before the 2006 coup. And Madam Speaker, I wonder who was the legal advisor of the Alliance Party or the National Alliance Party of Fiji that the Attorney General referred to while talking about 2006 elections. One should not criticize political compromises achieved through legal and legislative framework. The 2013 Constitution, like the 1990 Constitution, are not products of political compromises, but were born out of a coup and imposed documents. Madam Speaker, I refer to the President's address. He made some very noble suggestions to the political parties, not in this House, but for political parties outside of Parliament and to the general electorate as a whole. And one of the salient features was that he asked us all to be honest in our campaigns and in our general conduct of elections. Madam Speaker, however, I am disappointed but not surprised that the message of unity, togetherness and inclusivity has been ignored by the ruling party. The message I get from them is loud and clear. It is my way or the highway. They are the patriots and only they have the ability and the right to govern after the 2018 general elections. And that opposition is incapable of governing our nation. Most importantly, I feel that the other side is not a team, but a collection of individuals who are vociferously campaigning for votes individually because they know that their leader will be promoted as a single candidate during the election. I don't blame them, madam, because the electoral system is such. If the system was to elect the top 50 vote getters in Parliament, then the Fiji Fest would not have been in government. So the tone of their speeches is unsurprising. And no prizes for guessing their praise of the Constitution and the leader. They are trying to make an impression in order to be once again endorsed as candidates. Essentially, their political future hangs in the balance because for many of them, life after politics will be extremely difficult. Also, Madam Speaker, government thinks it has a monopoly on ideas, that it thinks are the best for Fiji. No one political party, a leader, person or organization has a monopoly on policies. In a democracy, no one single point of view must prevail. Madam Speaker, for this week, we have heard time and again from the government members that the opposition, which is critical of the Constitution, are hypocrites and should not contest the elections under this Constitution. Madam Speaker, it will be interesting if the same analogy is applied to the Prime Minister's right-hand man who will be by the side for his election. The Honourable Attorney General himself clarified in Parliament yesterday, in response to my colleague Honourable Chan, that he protested against the 1987 coup and the then interim government.
I said that. I just clarified it. That's your facts, right?
You clarified it?
I clarified it.
Yes, that's what I said.
I clarified this morning.
We know that he was one of the group of 18 activists who was arrested and charged by police for holding a meeting without permit. We know that this charge was wrong. This charge was wrong. This charge was wrong against you, Honourable Attorney General. Together with the 18 activists, he was exercising his right to protest. And this is a very important conduct in our elections. But to my wonderment, the Attorney General, having protested against a coup and an interim government, became an integral member of the regime after 2006 coup and was reappointed to the regime's cabinet that governed after abrogation of the 1997 Constitution. And yes, Madam Speaker, as the Attorney General, he was the chief legal officer under whose watch the public emergency regulations were imposed, making it illegal for more than 3 people to gather in a public place, thereby effectively prohibiting political parties and NGOs from protesting. As for opposing a constitution and fighting elections under its provisions, this is not a crime, Madam Speaker. The NFP, of which the good father, the good father of the Honorable Attorney General, who is present in this House, was an integral member who won 2 general elections under the imposed 1990 Constitution in 1992 and 1994. He was the most respected.
Point of order.
Why is he bringing my family into it? Speaker. And in particular, when my father is sitting in the chambers, he has now just stood there for the past 5 minutes. Madam Speaker, I stood there for the past 5 minutes, essentially having a go at me. That's fine, not a problem. But don't try and justify his claim by bringing my family members into it. In particular, my family members sitting in the gallery.
Thank you.
Try and justify it.
Thank you. That is not freedom.
That's not freedom of speech. You read the bloody standing orders.
Standing orders. You should not be mentioning a person that does not have the authority to defend himself here, and therefore you should not have brought in that name.
Madam Speaker,
withdraw.
Madam Speaker,
Would you withdraw?
Madam Speaker, I'm just paying respect to
I'm
the
telling you to withdraw.
withdraw.
The mention of the Attorney General's father sitting there.
But he was also a member of NFP.
He's not here to defend himself. What you're saying is right or wrong, I don't know. He's not here.
Well,
He does
you'll
not
only
have
know
the authority.
after you've heard me.
I'm telling you to withdraw.
Okay, I will withdraw.
Thank you. Please, I don't want any woo-woo. This seems to be the practice when I do exercise the authority of the chair. Any parliament, when the speaker makes a ruling, no one speaks against that ruling. And I cannot take kindly to all these groaning when I do make a ruling like that. Hon Prem Singh, you will.
Thank you, Madam.
may continue.
I withdraw references to
Thank you.
Honorable Senior Chief King. Madam Speaker, much has been said about the Constitution and how it has supposedly ended all evil that has beset our nation since independence. Madam Speaker, nothing can be further from the truth. The Bill of Rights in the Constitution have severe limitations not seen in the 1997 Constitution, or even the high draft Constitution that was destined for the dustbin. The independence of the Constitutional Offices Commission is highly questionable, and its membership is political. It is chaired by the Prime Minister, and its membership also includes the Honorable Attorney General, Leader of Opposition, and nominees of the office holders. Out of a total of 6 members, including the chair, 4 are from government. This Constitution also empowers a permanent secretary and a minister to recruit and terminate staff in their respective ministries. Ideally, this should be the job of the Public Service Commission. Madam Speaker, 2 years ago during my address on the motion to thank His Excellency, the then President, Dr. Impellinellitikau, and I said, and I quote, economic growth to generate employment, meritocracy in the civil service, and appointments being made at least in proportionate to the population of our ethnic groups. As a start, having a quota for recruitment of personnel from other ethnic groups in the military, again on meritocracy to give it a semblance of multiracialism, having bipartisan committees to collectively look at serious challenges facing sectors like the sugar industry, health, and medical services. My point here, Honorable Madam Speaker, is that it's all very well to finger wag on what should be acceptable parliamentary conduct and what is not. But reciprocity, humanity, and national interest should be our guiding values if we are to succeed at bipartisanship, and not arrogance and condensation. We on this side of Parliament continue to offer hands of bipartisanship. It is now up to the other side to reciprocate sincerity and respect in the national interest, unquote. Madam Speaker, unfortunately, my hope has been in vain. The open merit recruitment system, as alluded to our party leader, is a farce. This has been proven recently during the roadshow and our citation of contracts of civil servants and teachers. Madam Speaker, just last week, we were informed of a case where open merit recruitment system was abused. An acting principal in a prominent Lautoka school was told that she would be shifted elsewhere because of another principal was coming to replace her. The person replacing her wasn't the principal, but an officer of the CDU or an education officer. And the directive that the person be posted as principal to the school because it is obvious that the person went directly to the minister to intervene and get him the position in order to enjoy increased salaries of principals. With info. Again, this is a case of flouting authority and taking advantage of the Constitution that gives ministers and permanent secretaries powers to hire, terminate, and replace staff in the civil service. The Minister of the Civil Service, who vociferously promotes and defends the open merit recruitment system, should immediately look into this issue. I can provide him the details of this case or put him into touch with the aggrieved qualified acting principal. Madam Speaker, the contracts render meaningless the teachers' employment security and make them totally subservient to the government. Some of the regressive provisions are: A, renewal of the contract is at the absolute discretion of the government. B, the civil servant irrevocably agrees that non-renewal of the contract will not give rise to any cause of action whatsoever against the government. C, the duration of the contract expires immediately upon a civil servant reaching a retirement age of 55. D, renewal of the contract is subject to government requiring the services of the civil servant, and that too if he or she agrees to enter into another contract on a mutually agreed terms. E, the decision of government to transfer a civil servant on the existing terms of the contract to anywhere in Fiji is final. And F, government has the right to change or vary the contract anytime. This discriminatory and exploitative contractual employment that is being forced upon our teachers will not result in a harmonious, unified, and productive civil service. Such draconian contracts are subjugating our teachers and have no place in a genuine democracy. Madam Speaker, during the roadshow, we were surprised that the Director of Reform Unit made a racist comment against the staff of the Ministry of Education, obviously blaming them for her own failures and, of course, in presence of the Honorable Attorney General. FIJI One News on the 23rd of August carried this comment from the Reform Director, and I quote, "It was a bit of I thought I was speaking English, but I wasn't evidently. When I asked the question on the defense, they thought they were answering my question." The comment basically meant that the Minister of Education staff were inferior in intellect. And what an insult, Madam Speaker, and what nonsense. And the people are condoning this. Furthermore, Madam Speaker, we seek clarification from the government as to the role of current Civil Service Reform Director played in the Fijian Elections Office before her present role. According to the Joint Electoral Commission Fijian Elections Office, she was a technical advisor. The question that arises is, did her previous role have any influence in a recent appointment? Madam Speaker, the 2013 Constitution and its provisions like common and equal citizenry and policies formulated by government are supposed to have eradicated or reduced racism, removed discrimination, and upheld meritocracy. Here we point out that in December last year, a UN Special Rapporteur came to Fiji on a fact-finding mission on contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. His report to the 35th session of the Human Rights Council in June this year has received little or no publicity at all. Again, no prizes for guessing why this discriminatory treatment to the report by the local media that operates under restrictive minor decree, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the UN Special Rapporteur's report pointed out the lack of desegregated data. I repeat, he pointed out the lack of desegregated data. This is something we have been asking for, and you will recall, Madam Speaker, that in early 2015, my question seeking similar data on recruitments and appointments in the civil service was disallowed on the grounds that it would create racial ill will and hostility. But the report quite clearly states that the data is necessary to determine whether or not government's so-called non-discriminatory policies are working. This is very important, and report on this issue is self-explanatory. The report states, and I quote, Madam Speaker, in order to measure progress made on the elimination of racism and racial discrimination and to evaluate the effectiveness of the policies of inclusiveness set up by the current government, there needs to be an objective evaluation which can only be undertaken if statistics and in particular desegregated data are collected and made available. Unquote. This does not mean only data on race, ethnicity, but a whole range of different factors such as gender, age, sexual orientation, geography, income, access to social and economic services, and rights. Without desegregated data, Madam Speaker, it would be difficult to assess the effectiveness of the merit-based measures that the government has adopted in the recruitment and in awarding scholarships as well as in the other areas. This is the repertoire's report. Such data is also valuable as it provides the baseline upon which new policies and programs can be designed. Madam Speaker, the Special Rapporteur recalled that the Committee for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, or the SAID Committee, highlighted in its recommendations to Fiji in 2012 that if progress is to be monitored, such desegregated data is needed to measure whether the policies are effective and are reaching the most in need. Madam Speaker, both SAID and the Special Rapporteur noted government directive that the collection of data that typified ethnicity is no longer to be conducted. But SAID noted that while this directive was aimed at eliminating racial profiling, the SAID committee regretted the lack of desegregated data on the socio-economic situation of members of ethnic groups as well as the lack of gender analysis of data provided. The concern was based on the premise that if progress in eliminating discrimination based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin is to be monitored, some indication of the number of persons who might be treated less favorably on the basis of these characteristics. Madam Speaker, in the absence of this critically important information, governments claim that this constitution's anti-racism and discrimination is hollow. So is the claim that every single appointment to our civil service and other government control organizations is done on meritocracy. The UN Rapporteur has also recommended that the government should promptly sign and ratify key international instruments, including the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant of Economic and Social Cultural Rights.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, these are important international instruments. How government is going to get itself to signing, for example, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is another matter given the political parties' registration, conduct and funding disclosures decree now in act. This allows trade unionists and trade union staff from becoming members of political parties, compelling them to resign their positions if they do join the political party or contest the general elections. Madam Speaker, as we enter the final phase of the first term of Parliament since resumption of parliamentary democracy after 7.5 years of military rule, it is time to seriously consider the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to permanently seal the chapter of our past 30 years since 1987. Such a commission, Madam Speaker, will allow perpetrators and victims of the four coups that have plagued our nation for the last 30 years, since May 14, 1987, to openly and freely engage in truth-telling and confront their fears in view of conflicting statements and utterances regarding motives behind the coup. So that closure and healing for Fiji is achieved permanently and put to rest this unfortunate and turbulent chapter of our independent history.
You're taking it on, Honorable Singh. That's what you're doing.
Madam Speaker,
You're taking it on.
we are putting forward a word, and this is where you don't understand where we're coming from. Now, Madam Speaker, the blame game, name-calling and accusations have become the hallmark of our nation in the last 30 years. This Parliament has been no exception. Truth-telling and openly confronting one's fears has worked elsewhere. Madam Speaker, most notably in South Africa under the leadership of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. We should not be fearful and hesitant to embrace this noble objective, as we are all honorable men and women of integrity. No general elections, no government, and no constitution will cure our nation from this traumatic past. This is the only way forward, Madam Speaker. We in the NFP, who have never supported and participated in a coup, have been toppled after only 5 years in a coalition government of the late Dr. Timothy Babanda. Stand ready to work with all honorable members to facilitate this commission. Finally, Madam Speaker, we have nothing to fear. We only fear the Lord Almighty. The NFP has survived 4 military coups without succumbing to the trappings of power obtained illegally. And we will march forward in unison, guided by our unshakable principles and our fearless, selfless service to the nation for the last 54 years. Madam Speaker, thank you very much.
Thank you, honourable members. We will now suspend Parliament as we break for morning tea, and we will resume.